Okay. I think then we will move on to kind of the last section of the workshop, which first is just going to give an overview of some of the things you want to keep in mind when you're not just creating visualizations for yourself to like explore your data set and do data analysis, but thinking about your audience and thinking about how to make your data visualizations user-friendly and look pretty. Using, a good format is important. So like I've shown you with ggplot, there's so many options for what types of geoms or data points to use. And it's, I think, easy to get carried away with that a little bit and, add tons of features like change the size, change the color, stack things. My general advice is you want to keep it simple, right? You don't want to overwhelm people with too much variation, too much color, and just try to pick a format that is the best way to communicate whatever message that you're trying to communicate, whether it's a coordinate data set in our case, for our purposes, a scatter plot is really informative to get that spatial information as well as all the other variables. Even simple bar charts are still very informative. You just have to kind of know, whether you're plotting something discrete versus continuous. Generally, continuous variables are better with line graphs or density plots versus bar charts. And again, that has a lot to do with this Gestalt grouping idea that things are easier for us to perceive if they map onto our expectations. Things like trend lines going over time. A line graph is better for that than a bar graph. You can get the same information, it's just a little easier to extract when it's in the format that maps on better. The second goal with our data explanation is to kind of play around with these visual design elements. So things like what colors to use, how much color, how to group the colors, the amount of ink. So there's a lot of research actually about how much white space to have in your graph. And on one extreme, there is a perspective that you should have only information that's related to your statistical data points, and that everything else, like grid lines and even little caps on your error bars, like anything that could be visually distracting, you should get rid of. So that's like the most extreme view. I would say you kind of want to stay in the sweet spot of like getting rid of grid lines for sure, getting rid of, things that are visually distracting, but you don't want to get rid of too much that's going to make it hard for your audience to figure out what am I looking at even, right? So you can't go too extreme, I think. In terms of labels and legends, there's some research showing that it's generally easier for you to see what the variables are when you directly label your data points versus using legends. Sometimes legends are unavoidable. There's ways around that to make the legends, grouped better. So we can play around with that too. And just the general principle of grouping will come up a lot in this discussion. All right. So first we're going to talk about animation because we are going to learn how to use ggAnimate. I have a disclaimer though first, which is that there is a lot of research on how people perceive and interpret animated diagrams, and the news is not great. So typically it's very difficult for people to understand or comprehend what's going on in a visualization when animation is involved. That said, it can be useful if you design it in an informative way and you're not overwhelming people. But generally, you want to keep it simple. So just animating like one feature is probably enough. Okay. So now we're going to get into ggAnimate, which is the other extension package that you've downloaded. So make sure that that's loaded. So type library ggAnimate in your RStudio console. And the first thing we're going to do is essentially plot our crash data, so our X and Y coordinates, We're going to save that, though, as a variable p. And this is to make it easier on us to add this extra layer of the animation. So the difference here is we're actually putting our aesthetics in ggplot directly. So you're calling ggplot, you're giving it the data. You can just say AA crash in this case. You're calling the aesthetics, the X and Y variables, and then you're adding geom_point after that, just like an empty parenthesis as a separate layer, okay? So this is, again, going to store just the basic plot of the data in this variable p. And if you want, you can go ahead and just type plot parentheses p, and you'll see our typical coordinate plot that we've been seeing today. And then once you have that stored, we're going to add another layer here, which is this function transition_time. So there's a couple different ways to animate, and essentially transition time is really useful if you have some kind of variable with time information, which we do. We have a variable time of day, right, which gives you the hour information throughout the day. So in this case, we're going to store our animation as a variable anim, storing that as p, which is from up here. So you've already stored that. And then we're adding plus this function transition time, and then calling the variable time of day. And that's all we need to give it. We just give it the variable that we want to animate as a function of. So in this case, we're going to get an animation where we're plotting each frame at different hours of the day. And then it's going to transition between those different frames, so between the different hours, essentially. Okay. So once you've stored that, you can then just type it, anim, press enter, and you should get, in the viewer of your RStudio, you should get an animation that looks like that. Anyone getting it? No.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
It saved all. I didn't get an error though. It saved all the files.
Okay.
So
yes. So I had this issue as well. So when I initially ran this, I got an error that said it was saving all of the frames to a folder, but that it couldn't access the folder. So I had to go in to that folder and give myself write permission. So you may not have read-write permission in the folder that it's trying to save it to. So I can go through that if you guys are getting that error as well. Is anyone else getting that error?
I'm getting an error message saying time of day has to be some form of continuous, like integer or numeric. We had set it to that other form earlier that was HMS.
Oh, right. Right. So, yes. I think I had to, I'm trying to remember if I may have converted it back to do the time frame one.
The slides that were posted online, that code is working. It's got
Is that the transition state?
transition length equals 2, state length equals
Okay.
1. That worked for me.
Gotcha. So, yeah, I think when I was playing around with this, I imported the data again, and it was in that time zone format. So you can do that if you want. It might be the easiest thing. So the problem I think that I ran into was I was able to get the animation to work using the transition state version, but the problem was when I wanted to add a label of the time, it was a much better visualization using this frame time and basing it off of the actual timestamp instead of the states. So, so yeah, I think I did probably go back and change, import the data as is. If you guys want to do that as well, that's probably the easiest thing to do. So if you just import your data set again so that it's in that original time zone data format, because we did change it to the hours, minutes, seconds earlier in the workshop. So it's now a character string for most of you. So the original version, though, is a timestamp based on time zone. Okay, so I would recommend doing that. Just doing the import, same as before. If you did from Excel, browse and find your data set and import it again. Okay. Okay. So let me, I'll go ahead and do that as well because I probably have the same issue. And if you want, you can just double check that your time of day variable is, in fact, that timestamp version. Okay, so yeah, it should look like that. I'm just going to go ahead and see this code. So hopefully that should work for you guys as well. Is anyone not getting animation to work? Yeah, okay.
What? She said to change. She's on it, but probably. So even I know where it's at, but it creates a new temporary directory every time. And the new directory doesn't have it. So what I'm trying now is I restarted our studio.
It just says,
So
prints the
administrator
images
has
to
access.
directly.
Because I'm generating the files.
I don't know.
I'm having the same problem. You have to have write access to the directory where there are people, and I don't, so.
Okay, I showed this computer. Mine.
Sometimes it's a weird deal.
How do you know?
That actually it
Actually,
it's GIF,
renders.
SKI.
Oh, it just says that it was built under a different version of app, but it works fine.
Yeah, and then it's
And the new code is
okay. Hopefully it works.
yeah.
A note to also download the GIF package if you haven't done that, because you need that to actually render it as a GIF. Yeah. So that's the warning I was getting. So I had to manually go in and change my permissions to the folder that it's trying to save to have write permission. So the location is for me, it was in my Bear folder.
Can we specify where we want it to go? Great, that's really good. Better answer, yeah.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know how to do it, but you can look into it.
What package do we need to render it?
The GIFSKI, GIFSKI.
We're getting an error if I try to find that the time data is not in the right format.
Honestly, I would try closing our studio and restarting it.
Okay.
That might be helpful. If not, I'll come. I had to do that a couple times. So for those of you who have this working, I'm just gonna show you next how to save this. It's pretty simple, but basically, first to add a label. So you can see here, I've added this title to the graph saying hour, and then basically giving it a variable frame time where it's going to update the title as the frames transition to whatever frame time it is. So as the animation is happening, the hour time will change with it. Okay, so that's what this layer is doing, and the function you're going to use is this labs, which changes labels essentially. Title is going to give it a title at the top. Okay. Then, once you've done that, and you want to save this as a GIF, there's a function called anim_save. So this is part of the GG Animate package as well. The easiest thing to do here is just save it as, give it a name. I gave mine AA crash and save it as a GIF, so .gif in quotes. And then the comma here, if you don't specify an animation, it'll just default to saving whatever the most recent animation you created was, but you can actually call the variable anim or whatever you created to be the one that you want to save. And then you've got a nifty GIF that you can embed wherever you want. Okay. Any issues? Yeah.
Where does it save when you use that command?
So in my case, it saves to just my user directory. But you can specify a path also. That's a feature of that. If you want it to be in a different directory, you can specify it. Are we generally good to move on, or any other issues people are having generating the animation? So I'm gonna keep moving on, guys. I just wanted to show you a couple other links that give more examples of things you can do with GG Animate. So these are kind of open source things, like other people are contributing their own examples of code, and just kind of expanding on some of the features that we're not getting into today, like how to control the speed or the look of the transitions, using pictures instead of data points, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to mention those links are there for you to explore. Okay. So we're going to move on to a couple other design principles when you're trying to create data visualizations that are user-friendly. So again, I just wanted to talk about color grouping, and specifically with using colors to group direct labels to improve on this problem of mapping legends to specific data points. So this was a nice example I just found on the web. Here's the source if you want to look through how they actually went about doing this. But this was the original graph this person started with. It's a decent graph, but it is kind of hard to go between the different, in this case, types of majors and figure out, which is which. And so they basically edited it to put the direct labels here, so no more legend, and also using the color of the data point to match the text of the label. So you can much more easily kind of grouping both, I guess, by proximity and color, in this case, helping you to map on which variable is which. Okay, so this is a nice thing to do when possible. As I mentioned before, in terms of ink ratio, I generally prefer to use minimal grid lines, but keeping any other information that's really necessary for people to figure out, which data points are which, and if there's any grouping information, you want to keep that. So I just wanted to highlight two of the themes that I like that kind of give a more minimalistic look. So theme _ classic is just going to have no grid lines whatsoever, just a pure white background. And then theme light has grid lines, but they're really light, so they're not jumping out at you as much. So this is like another layer after you've done your ggplot geoms and whatever else you've included. You just add theme classic or theme light at the end. I do want to talk a little bit about color scales. We, like I said, didn't really get to work a lot with continuous variables today, but this is a nice option to use some kind of gradient color scale, like if you're talking about temperatures going from cold to hot, you might want to use a scale that goes from blue to red. And generally, you do want to try to use common sense here with what colors you pick so that there's some kind of meaningful alignment between the magnitude of your variable that you're showing and the directionality as well. So generally speaking, big things or larger numbers map onto darker, smaller maps onto lighter. So that's a nice alignment. Hot generally aligns with red and cold with blue. So we have these kind of preconceived ideas about what colors map onto what directions or magnitudes. And there's a really nice website here. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, the ColorBrewer 2 website, which basically gives you some nice pre-tested color palettes to work with. Pre-tested in the sense that they are easily distinguishable from one another. So like, let's say you want to display 5 different levels of a variable using 5 different colors. It'll give you some options for colors that are very easily discriminable from one another. And it also gives you some nice options through ggplot2. So scale is another layer that you can use to control what colors map onto your variables, right? So there is a scale color brewer function in R that is basically linked to these same color brewer palettes. And then you can specify, which specific color palette you want as an argument in that function. Okay. And then another nice feature that you can do, this is, again, this link to show you some different shapes of data points. If you have colors that are hard to see, so one thing that might happen if you go with a scale of like really light blue to really dark blue, the light blue might be kind of hard to see if you don't have an outline around the data point. So there are different shapes. I'm just going to pull this up really quick so you can see what the options are. So here are all of the different shape options for geom point, for instance. Oh, you're not seeing it. Sorry, hang on, I gotta end my show first.
I have a question you can maybe answer.
Okay.
What goes between the parentheses when using underscore classic, and then open and close paren. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so that's just the default option, but there may be some parameters you can play around with. And if you have any questions about any of these functions, you can always look at the documentation to see what are your options for playing around with it. But that default, and it'll show you on the cheat sheet as well what the default looks like. So yes, so these are the shapes that I was referring to. So far we've really just shown dots, like circles, for the data points for GM point. But let's say you want to have a dot that is filled with like a light blue, but outlined in black. You would want to use this shape number 21 here, which gives you the option to fill the dot with a color and give a different color outline. Okay. So I would definitely recommend doing that if you're working with colors that are on the lighter end of a gradient, for sure. Okay. And then you just control that that shape. You just say shape equals 21 in this case in your aesthetics mapping. All right. So I just have a couple more exercises for you to kind of play around with some of these features to now make your data visualizations look good, okay? So we've plotted a version of this already where we are plotting the coordinates of our crashes by road, I don't know if we've done road conditions yet. We've done weather conditions together, but you have another variable called road conditions, which gives you, going from dry, wet, / snow, and ice. So what I want you to try to do is, without me showing you, try to recreate this specific visualization. A couple things to note here. If you try this and you don't reorder the variables going from driest to ice, it's going to do it in alphabetical order, right? So you have to reorder the levels to be in this specific order. And then what I've also done is use a color gradient that maps on a little better, going from dry being the lightest color blue to ice being the darkest color blue instead of those random colors that ggplot defaults to. I have also filled the dots with blues and outlined them in black. And the theme is minimalistic. So so I want you to try and recreate this as best you can. If you have any questions, I'm here, and we'll work on this for a little bit.
The display that we always have to sort that in it or
I think so. But because we're mapping the variable onto a color in this case, you do have to reorder it in the data. But if you don't care about the colors mapping on a certain way, you just want to rearrange how your legend looks, you can do that in a different way. Does that make sense? If you didn't care about the colors mapping on to specific levels,
I do them.
you do in this case. Yeah.
So what do you do is you specify.
Yeah, so we did the levels. We did the levels earlier in the workshop when we changed. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same process here. So now you're and specify the order going from dry, wet, slush, snow, next.
Okay, so we think that, okay, and specify.
Yep. Is anyone still working on? Is anyone still working on this exercise here?
Are you gonna go over the solution?
Yeah, I would like to if everyone's ready. Yeah? Okay. Okay. So the first step here is to reorder the levels of the variable road conditions so that it's in that same order that I specified, starting with dry, going to wet, to slush, snow, ice. So using that same kind of format factor code that we used before. And then this code here, so we start with ggplot and data, Ahrefs. We're using geom point here for our geom. We're mapping on our x and y coordinates with longitude and latitude. Here, we're going to use the fill parameter, not color, because we want that shape that has a fill of one color and an outline of a different color. So fill here is the one you want. And that's going to be mapped onto road conditions. So your road conditions will vary as a function of how much fill is in each circle. So here we want a shape that allows us to have a different color for the inside of the circle versus the outline. So like I showed you, that shape in our case could be something like 21. So you specify that with shape equals 21. And then we have to specify the color of the outline. So we do that with the color parameter equals black in this case because they're outlined in black. I did manipulate the size. I just increased them a little bit to 3 just to make them a little bigger. The second part of this is to use that scale fill brewer in this case. So before I showed you the option of scale color brewer, here because we're varying the road conditions variable with that fill parameter, we need the scale fill brewer option. And in this case, the palette I was using was called blues. So you just say palette equals blues in quotations. And then I just used the classic theme, so theme classic, to get the white background. Were you guys close? Okay, great. So again, this is just a nicer way, to get rid of some of the grid lines and also to give yourself a scale that is a little more meaningful than just those random colors that ggplot defaults to. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, your next exercise, if you haven't started working on it, is to try to create a visualization of the coordinates over time of day, mapping the plot, so getting that ggmap plot, and then putting the ggAnimate on top of the map. The other thing you want is a title, where the title says 2018 collisions by time of day, and then the subtitle is going to update with the frames, giving it that frame time. Any questions about what you're doing? I'm available if you have any questions, so just let me know. And this is the last thing we'll do, unless you guys have any other just general questions for me. All right, so for those of you watching, I'm just gonna go over some sample code for how to actually make this visualization, and then we will wrap up. But essentially what you're going to do is kind of layer on these elements. So starting with your previous code where you created your GG map of the Ann Arbor Road. Okay, so here's I think the relevant code we want. So, so in my case, I'm starting with storing this animation as a variable called map anim. And then I'm using ggmap of the AA map, which is the variable we created before, which is the Ann Arbor map. Adding on a layer of geom points with the data coming from our AA crash, and then creating the mappings of the X and Y longitude and latitude. In this case, I'm also increasing the size here of the title text. So I'm using theme, calling the text parameter, and specifying that the size of that text should be 17 in this case, but of course you can play around with that. To add the actual titles themselves, I'm using that labs function here. The title I'm setting to say 18 collisions by time of day, comma, and then adding that subtitle to actually show the time updating with frame time. And then the very last thing I'm doing is adding the transition part of the code, so to animate it, and again, just using that transition time function by time of day as the variable. All right, so I may have some parentheses issues here, but we'll try it. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Try this again. Oops. Oh. Sorry, I'm having some issues here. Just bear with me. But that's essentially the code. I'm probably missing a parentheses or something, but that's generally the code you want, and it should give you this. Show you back here. So I showed you at the beginning of the talk what this looked like here. So. So in my case, I just did the additional step of saving it as a GIF so that I could then embed it in the PowerPoint. So we've got our title up here, the subtitle updating with the actual time, and our collisions plotted over our map. So thank you to GG Animate and GG Map for allowing us to do this. And thank you guys for your attention, and I hope this is all helpful. And if you have any questions, you can email me, and there's tons of documentation and links on the web as well for ggplot and all of the different features that we talked about. So, good luck.
All right.